Imagine a place where every question had an answer waiting to be found. A place where the greatest minds of the ancient world gathered, not for gold, not for conquest, but for knowledge. For nearly 7 centuries, such a place existed. A building, or perhaps a collection of buildings, that housed the accumulated wisdom of an entire civilization. It was called the Library of Alexandria. And then, it was gone. To understand the library, we must first understand the world that created it. In the 4th century before the Common Era, the ancient world was in upheaval. Alexander of Macedon, a young king barely in his 20s, was marching across continents, reshaping the known world with a ferocity that had never been seen before. But Alexander was not merely a warrior, he was a student, tutored by none other than Aristotle himself, one of history's greatest philosophical minds. And from Aristotle, Alexander inherited something more powerful than any sword. He inherited a hunger for knowledge. In 331 BCE, Alexander arrived in Egypt. He was welcomed, not as a conqueror, but as a liberator, freeing the Egyptians from Persian rule. And it was here, on the shores of the Mediterranean, that he chose to build a new city. He named it, with characteristic modesty, after himself: Alexandria. Today, Alexandria is a modern Egyptian city of nearly 6 million people. Traffic fills its streets, cafes line its boulevards. The sea shimmers in the distance, much as it did 2,000 years ago. But beneath the noise of the present, an extraordinary past lies buried. When Alexander founded this city, he envisioned something unprecedented. Not just a capital, but a crossroads, a meeting point between East and West, between the ancient wisdom of Egypt and the intellectual tradition of Greece. He would never see it completed. Alexander died in Babylon in 323 BCE, at just 32 years old. His empire was divided among his generals. Egypt fell to one of his most trusted commanders. His name was Ptolemy, and it was Ptolemy and the dynasty he founded who would transform Alexander's dream into one of the ancient world's greatest realities. Ptolemy I was a shrewd ruler. He understood that power was not only won with armies, it was sustained with prestige, with culture, with the appearance of wisdom. His vision was the Musion, from the Greek word for seat of the Muses, an institution dedicated entirely to the pursuit of learning. Scholars would be housed there, fed there, funded by the state, freed from every worldly concern so that they could think. Attached to the Musion was something even more ambitious: a library. Not just any library, but a universal one. A collection that would contain, in Ptolemy's words and those of his successors, all the books in the world. It sounds like the dream of a madman, and yet, for a time, they came remarkably close. The Ptolemaic rulers pursued books with an almost obsessive determination. Ships arriving at the port of Alexandria were searched, not for weapons or contraband, but for scrolls. Any texts found were taken, copied by scribes, and catalogued. The originals were kept for the library. The copies, sometimes, were returned to their owners. The royal decree was simple and absolute. Every vessel that docked at Alexandria must surrender its books. This was not a request. The scrolls themselves tell us something important about this world. In antiquity, there were no books as we know them. Knowledge lived on papyrus rolls, sometimes just a few meters long, sometimes stretching for dozens. A single book, what we might call a chapter, could fill an entire scroll. A major work, like Homer's Iliad, would require dozens of scrolls just to contain it. At its height, estimates suggest the library held somewhere between 400,000 and 700,000 scrolls. The exact number is lost to us, a fitting irony. What we do know is that the scope was breathtaking. Works of medicine, mathematics, astronomy, philosophy, poetry, history, drama, engineering. In Greek, Egyptian, Hebrew, Aramaic, Persian, and more. And where there were books, there were scholars. The library and its attached Mausion attracted the greatest minds of the ancient world, drawn by royal stipends, free meals, and access to the largest collection of knowledge humanity had ever assembled. Euclid, the father of geometry, is believed to have worked in Alexandria. Archimedes, the mathematical genius who calculated the value of pi, studied here. Eratosthenes, the chief librarian himself, calculated the circumference of the Earth here, using nothing more than shadows and geometry, with remarkable accuracy. His calculation, made over 2,000 years ago, was accurate to within a few percentage points of modern measurements. Think about that. 2,000 years ago, a man in Alexandria knew, roughly astonishingly, how large the world was. As the collection grew, it needed organization. That task fell to a scholar named Callimachus, a poet and librarian who undertook one of the most ambitious intellectual projects of antiquity. He created the Penachis, a comprehensive catalog of the library's holdings, organized by subject and author. It ran to 120 scrolls. 120 scrolls, just to list what the library contained. The Penachis itself is lost. We know of it only through references in other ancient works. A catalog of a catalog that no longer exists, of a library that no longer stands. For 2 centuries, the Ptolemaic dynasty nurtured the library, but dynasties, like libraries, are not immune to time. By the 1st century BCE, a new power dominated the Mediterranean world. Rome cast its long shadow eastward, and Egypt found itself caught between ambition and survival. It was during this volatile period that one of history's most debated events took place. An event that has, for centuries, been blamed for the library's destruction. An event involving one of Rome's most famous generals. In 48 BCE, Julius Caesar arrived in Alexandria, drawn into the political chaos surrounding Cleopatra and her brother Ptolemy XIII. Outnumbered and besieged, Caesar ordered the ships in the harbor to be set on fire. Ancient sources, including the Roman writer Plutarch, suggest that the fire spread beyond the harbor and consumed a warehouse containing thousands of scrolls, possibly books awaiting cataloging, possibly an overflow storage of the library itself. But here, history becomes complicated. The ancient sources disagree. Some say the fire was catastrophic, others barely mention it, and many scholars today believe the main library was not in fact destroyed by Caesar's fire at all. The story of the library's end is not a single dramatic moment. It is something far more human and far more tragic. It is the story of slow neglect. As Rome's power grew, Alexandria's importance as an intellectual center began to shift. The generous royal funding that had sustained the Mausoleum and library began to shrink. Scholars stopped coming. Collections stopped growing. Papyrus deteriorates. Scrolls, unattended, crumble, fade, are eaten by insects and moisture and time. A library, like a garden, requires constant tending. Without care, it does not burn, it simply fades. By the 3rd century CE, some 300 years after Caesar's harbor fire, the great institution of the Mausoleum was already a pale shadow of what it had been. The library, as a functioning center of knowledge, had likely ceased to exist in any meaningful sense long before any final act of destruction. There is one more dramatic chapter to recount. In 391 CE, the Roman Emperor Theodosius issued an edict ordering the destruction of pagan temples throughout the empire. In Alexandria, the bishop Theophilus led a Christian mob against the Serapeum, the great temple of the god Serapis. The temple was destroyed. The Serapeum had housed a secondary collection of the library, perhaps an annex of scrolls. Whether those scrolls were destroyed, had already been removed, or had long since perished, we cannot say with certainty. What we can say is this. By the end of the 4th century CE, the Library of Alexandria, in any form recognizable to its founders, was gone. It is here that the documentary must pause and ask the question that has haunted historians, philosophers, and dreamers for centuries. What was lost? We will never know the full answer. That is the nature of the loss. But we can trace the outlines through references in surviving texts, through gaps in our knowledge that ancient writers hint were once filled. We know that Aristarchus of Samos proposed a heliocentric model of the solar system, that the Earth moves around the Sun, nearly 2,000 years before Copernicus. His work was likely held in the library. It did not survive. We know that Hero of Alexandria designed what appears to have been a rudimentary steam engine, the Iolepili, in the 1st century CE. What else did he design? What did his lost manuscripts contain? We know that the plays of Sophocles alone, one of the greatest dramatists who ever lived, once numbered over 120 works. 7 survive. 7. Over the centuries, the Library of Alexandria has become more than a historical institution. It has become a symbol of knowledge versus ignorance, of preservation versus destruction, of civilization's fragility. It has been invoked by writers, politicians, and scientists, used as a warning, as a lament, as a rallying cry. But the myth, compelling as it is, can obscure the truth. The library was not destroyed in a single catastrophic moment by a single villain. It declined over centuries, victim to changing politics, reduced funding, shifting centers of power, and the simple ravages of time. This, in some ways, is the more important lesson. Knowledge is not only threatened by those who seek to destroy it. It is threatened every time we fail to care for it, every time we defund it, every time we look away. In 2002, the world did something remarkable. Near the site of the ancient library, a new one was opened. The Bibliotheca Alexandrina, a joint project of the Egyptian government and UNESCO, was conceived as a tribute and a continuation. It holds millions of books in dozens of languages. It houses museums, galleries, research centers, and a planetarium. It cannot replace what was lost. Nothing can, but it stands as a statement that the idea the ancient Ptolemies once had, the idea that human knowledge deserves a home, deserves protection, deserves to be shared, that idea has not died. Somewhere beneath this city, beneath the roads and buildings and centuries of human life, lie the foundations of what was once the greatest repository of knowledge the world had ever known. The scrolls are gone. The building is gone. The names of most of the scholars who worked there are gone. But the questions they asked about the size of the earth, about the motion of stars, about the nature of mathematics and the structure of the body and the meaning of beauty, those questions did not die with the library. They live in every laboratory, every classroom, every library, every curious mind that dares to look up from the present and ask. We are all, in some small way, the inheritors of Alexandria.